Hey, well, we're going to start over again. Had a technical difficulty. Doesn't happen often, but happens sometime. So today we commemorate the 2-year anniversary of the horrific massacre at Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh that killed 11 Jews for the sole reason that they were Jewish. And since then we've had more massacres in Poway, in Muncie, in New Jersey, and anti-Semitism is on the rise, as we spoke yesterday. And today, as we commemorate these 11 souls, we not only promise never to forget, but we promise to remember, to live as Jews, as proud Jews, to fight anti-Semitism, to stand tall, not to be ashamed of who we are, but to celebrate our heritage and fight for justice for ourselves and for all. And to remember that we're all created in the image of God and we're all God's children. To connect something to the portion about the Jewish people, so in this week's Torah portion we read about Abraham's covenant with God, and God promises him all these things, but Abraham says, I want to have a child. If I don't have a child, what's it going to help me? And God takes him outside. God takes him outside and says, look at the stars. Count the stars. And he says, if you could count the stars, so too will your children be. And the question is twofold. First of all, what does it mean count the stars? Does God want him to count the stars, or does he not want him to count the stars? If he didn't want him to count the stars, he just wanted to tell him that his children won't be able to be counted. He should have said, just as you can't count the stars, your children won't be counted. So why does he tell him to count it? Secondly, what does it mean, so too will be your children? Does God really say that we won't be able to be counted? I mean, the last Jewish numbers has 14 million Jews. Before the Holocaust, we were 18 million Jews. And besides, later on when God compares us to the sand, he doesn't say count the sand. He just says, just as you can't count the sun, so too your children won't be counted. There's a fascinating commentary that says like this, and the Rebbe elaborates on this. How many stars are there really? In our own Milky Way galaxy, there's between 100 billion and 1 trillion stars. How many galaxies are there? So they estimate between 100 billion and 1 trillion galaxies, which puts the number of stars at 10 sextillion to 1 septillion. And the last study, I think in 2003, put it at 70 sextillion stars. And that's all in the galaxies that we know. They say there's a gazillion galaxies that we can't even see, even with the most scientific microscopes. We can't see them. So imagine, if someone came to you and said, go count the stars, what would you say? You'd either say, are you out of your mind? Are you crazy? That's impossible. How can I count the stars? Or if you didn't want to bother with him, you would go onto Google, and you would Google it, and in a seventh of a second, you would ask Rabbi Google, and there you would know, you would have the number of how many stars there are. You would never try to count it. But what does Abraham do? Abraham goes out, it says, and he tries to count the stars. And God says, so will your children be. You know, years ago there was a cartoon, some of you might remember it, about this little bird, a Roadrunner. And there was this silly coyote that was trying to chase it. And it went around in circles. And finally, one time, the Roadrunner bird hid behind a stone. They were on this high mountain, on a high cliff. And suddenly, the coyote, who was foolish, runs by and doesn't see it and thinks that it jumped. And it jumps off. And suddenly, it's standing right in the middle of the air, high, without anything below it, and it looks around, and then it sees from far, it sees the bird hiding, the Roadrunner, and it realizes how stupid it was. And then, at that moment, it looks down, and it sees what's going on below it, and it falls down and it crashes. Now, I don't think the cartoon was written with much intention, But how was the coyote standing, defying gravity and not falling down? Until only it looked down. And you know what the answer is? That as long as the coyote didn't realize that it was doing the impossible, didn't realize that it was impossible, it was able to do it. And the rabbis say that what God was telling Abraham was like this. God tells Abraham, go count the stars. Abraham doesn't say it's impossible. He says, if God tells me that, God took me out, he says it, I'm going to go count it. So God says, so too will your children be. Just as you are able to do the impossible, so too your children, the Jewish people, will defy gravity, will defy the odds, and be able to do the impossible. Think about it. God comes to Abraham at the beginning of this week's portion, and he tells him, Lech lecha, go travel. He doesn't just tell him to leave his home birth. He tells him, leave your paradigm shift, make a paradigm shift, leave your worldview. See things from my vantage point, from the way God wants you to. And God tells him suddenly to do things that he's never done before. But what does he say? He takes him out. He says, don't look at nature. Don't see the laws of nature, of gravity, and think that they have a hold on you. Because they only have a hold on you when you think they do. Abraham wasn't naive. He wasn't blind to the reality. But he knew that with the power that God vested with him to change the world, he could defy and accomplish the impossible. I think it was General Montgomery who said? He said that the hard we do right away, and the impossible we do a little later. And what Abraham was saying is, there is no such a thing as impossible. God gave Abraham that gift, and he said to him, you know what? So will your children be. If you look through the ages, if you look through the 3,800 year storied history of the Jewish people since Abraham, we have constantly defied gravity and done the impossible. How many times have people said, oh, there's so much anti-Semitism. Look what happened, it's getting worse. You'll never be able to accomplish it. Yet we were able to do it. Because at that moment when God told Abraham to come out and look at the stars and count it, Abraham started counting. Because he recognized that nature and the laws of nature only control you when you limit yourself to them. But if you're able to reach beyond, then you're able to do the impossible. I think about my parents, my grandparents, all of our grandparents. My father lost his mother at 7 years old, grew up an orphan. My mother was an orphan from 2. Her father ran away from the Russians and the Nazis after he sat in prison. And they came to America to rebuild their family. And some people say it was impossible to be Jews in America, to rebuild a successful family and to stay strong to your Judaism and the values that God gave us. It's impossible. Yet they showed us that what did God tell Abraham? Count the stars. And when he started counting it, even though it was impossible, God said, so will your children be. They'll be able to do the impossible. And the same is for all of us today as we commemorate the massacre of 11 Jews in a synagogue just for the fact that they were there praying for pure hate. We recognize that despite all the hate, despite all the challenges, and despite the obstacles, we will carry on and we will grow and we will be stronger and we will remain faithful and we will do the impossible. And that's what we've done through the ages in medicine, in economics, in technology, in spirituality, in holiness. We've accomplished the impossible. And that's the gift that Abraham gives us. So if there's something you wanted to do and you thought it's impossible, remember it's only impossible if that's what you think. But if you're like Abraham and you're his child, then you look up at the stars and you start counting and you accomplish everything. Just like that coyote. Only when you look down and you realize that it's impossible to fly will you fall. But till then, continue flying. Have a great day.